Okay, so this is part one. So what are we going to do today? Quick review, a couple things on the midterm. I will discuss a couple of feedback items that I got from your feedback that you included on the midterm survey, which was really helpful for me. And we're going to look at a couple things. One is we're going to look at one thing we didn't do with our application that we've been building is we have yet to do a log out. We did log in with register and login a few weeks ago. We didn't get a chance to add log out to that, so that's the first thing we're going to add to it. Then we're going to look at making our code modular. We have a whole bunch of duplication in those files. We're going to take that application and streamline it so that we've reduced the duplication and made our code more efficient. And then we'll start looking at adding a proper error handling. So our application works, but right now it's still possible to crash it. So we want to look at different ways users might crash it and what should we do, how can we handle that scenario if errors pop up. So we'll talk about what are some of the things we need to do in a web application, because errors will invariably happen. Sometimes they'll be our fault, sometimes they'll be our user's fault, sometimes it'll just be a technical problem that something's gone wrong somewhere. So we need to look at how do we handle those things gracefully in a PHP application. And then the last thing is I'll give you lab 3, which is basically just to practice implementing some of the error handling techniques we're going to look at. Because tomorrow is the holiday, normally your labs are due Wednesday night, I'll make the lab due Thursday. So you don't have to, I mean, it won't take you that long. You probably have time to finish the lab today, but if you don't, you have until Thursday midnight to get it done. Okay. I just wanted to go over, by and large, the midterms were quite well done. In fact, I could probably find quickly the class average. I think the class average was pretty good. Let's see. So the class average came to 36 out of 40. What was the exam out of? 36 out of 44. So that's pretty good. That's actually quite high. 36. So 82 was the class average, which is pretty good. So the highest mark was 43 out of 44, which was good. Most people did quite well on the practical part. I'm just going to show you what I was looking for. So here was, a sample. So we had the 4 meals that got filled into a drop-down list. And when I clicked the button, I got a table that filtered out, rather than showing me all of the ingredients in the table, it just showed me the ingredients that were related to what meal I picked. And I think I gave you a hint on there saying you'd need to use a where clause on this page to get the list. So on your select page, I just wanted to make sure, believe it or not, I have given a similar exam before, not exactly the same, but similar, where people actually typed out the 4 option tags of the meals. They hard-coded it into the page, which wasn't the idea. The idea was to use PHP for this. So you had to query the list of meals and populate each option. And a few people had probably got marks of 8 out of 10 where they got this page working, except the problem was no matter what meal I picked, I got all the ingredients for every meal, rather than just a filtered list for what I picked. So if you did this, I did make a comment, showed you the code in my comment as to how you would fix that. So all we needed was to grab the selection from the drop-down and store it in a variable, and then we needed to, actually this is an old version, sorry, it should be like this, with a bound parameter. And you just needed to bind the meal parameter to our meal variable. So if you didn't get this code, I gave you that code when I marked it. So I showed you how you would go about doing that using the bound parameter. Okay. Did anybody have a question about this little mini application I gave you? Okay. I did get some very useful feedback on the survey, which is why I gave it to you, because I always get some good suggestions there. I want to address a couple of the suggestions because there was a couple of things people had asked or made some comments that I thought made a lot of sense. One was several people said it would be great if we had some other application we could build for practice that wasn't necessarily for marks, but something that we could do on our own time so that you could take what you're doing in here and apply them to some other problem. So I actually had thought I had shown you this back on the first day of class, but probably if I did, we all forgot about it. In the Assignments tab, there's a folder here that says Optional Project. Okay. So there's a text document description, and then I've given you a zip file with a bunch of screenshots. And I'll show you a sample of the application. So basically what you can build on your own time, you can build as much of this or as little as it as you want. You can build it on your own, you can build it with other people. I'm not going to mark this, but if you work on it and you want help with it, then certainly you can come and ask for help with it. So an application, useful application you build is an online time tracker. Okay, so something that, let's say you had your own development company and you had developers working for you, that at the end of the day, each developer would log what they did that day. Okay. So the entire site should be private, so there needs to be a login page, and all of the pages need to have an authentication check inside of them. Okay. So you should be able to, and passwords should be hashed. Okay. So there should be pages for adding, editing, and deleting clients, as well as pages for editing, and deleting projects. So every project belongs to a client. So one client can have many projects, but one project belongs to one and only one client. So you have a one-to-many relationship there. Then you'd have create, read, update, and delete functionality for timesheets. So at the end of the day, somebody who does their work, they would enter the date, they would choose a client from a drop-down list, then they'd choose a project from a drop-down list, they'd enter in how many hours they worked, and they put in a description of what they did that day. And then there should be a timesheet log that's searchable, so that, for example, you could choose a client and see all of the timesheets for a particular date, or you could pick an employee and pick all of their timesheets so that you could pay that employee. Okay. And you would include input validation, error handling, and some basic CSS. I'll show you what this actually looks like. The very first time I hired a student, this was her first co-op job, was we didn't have any kind of time tracking system. So I had her build one. So she built the login page. So she built this, I think, in 2007. I still actually use it. So here's the page for adding a client. So just a simple form. Adding a project, and this includes a drop-down list that fills all the clients. You know how to do this. I could edit a client or a project. And then if I want to track hours, I just pick a client, choose one of the projects, put in and then I click submit, and it would log my time. So I would actually use this. We use this for two purposes. The first purpose was whenever I had students working for me, this is how I paid them. So at the end of 2 weeks, I'd go into the hours log, and I'd pick a user, and I'd put in, the last 2 weeks of date range, and I'd run a search, and it would bring up all of the hours that person worked. It would give me the total down at the bottom, and then I'd send them a check. Okay. I also could use this. Some of my clients, I would bill hourly. It's hard to get your clients to agree to get you to pay hourly, but if they do, it's great. So to do billing, rather than choosing, I could say all users, but I could pick one client. And I could put in a date, let's say I was going to bill them every month. When I'd send them the bill, the first thing I would do is go in here, figure out how many hours we worked in total, come down to the bottom, and then I would send this to an Excel spreadsheet. My student figured out how to do this, how to dump a grid of HTML grid to an Excel file. So then I would use this and I would attach this spreadsheet to their bill. So rather than them having to call me saying, okay, well, you gave me a bill for $3,000, what did you do for the $3,000? I would just send this along with the bill. Here you go. Here's all the work we did. You can see who worked. You can see every day that we worked, how much time we spent and exactly what we did. And I never had them calling, I never had customers calling to complain about their bill because we'd done this. So if you're going to do any sort of freelance work, having some sort of time trackers are useful. The other useful thing about this is after you quote on a project, what I always do about halfway through the project is I start looking here, okay, we quoted 200 hours, we're halfway done, how many hours have we spent? Are we on time and are we on budget? And when a project is finished, every time I would look at my log and I'd compare how many hours did we actually work versus how many hours did we quote and how many hours did we get paid for. Because if you don't track your time, it's hard to quote accurately on new projects, right? If you track how long things take you, it's easier to give somebody a more accurate estimate. So for a whole host of reasons, having this kind of application is really helpful. And this is something when you're going out and working, even if you're not doing freelance work, you're working in a web company, this is something your project manager will want to know. How much time, if I say, Yash, I need you to build registration and login, how much time do you need? Right? The only way you're going to know is if you start recording when you're working and you get a sense of, okay, this is how long it takes me to do this. And then you can give your bosses a more accurate estimate of how much time you need because they're going to go and quote to their clients based on how much time the developers say they need. Okay, so even just for your own personal use, this is a really useful web application. So what I've done, I've basically taken screenshots of this application. That's what's in this zip file, are the different screens. So you actually can see what the end product looks like because I'm not giving you all logins to get in here. Okay. So this is something you can build on your own time. Would also be a useful thing to have as a portfolio piece. Okay. So if you have your own online time tracker that's up and running, you can use it for your own use. You can practice with the skill. You can practice the things we're doing in class, and you can grow it and evolve it over time. So build as much or as little of this as you want. But several people said they would really like to have something else that they could work on in addition to what we do in class or the assignments. So here you go. This would be one suggestion. By all means, build something else, but I've kind of laid out all of the requirements, which is exactly this application, really. I've just reverse engineered it. So those specifications, that was pretty much what I gave my co-op student. And that was, like I said, that was her first co-op job for me back 8 years ago. I said, the first thing we need is a way for us to all track time, so why don't you go ahead and build something that we can use as a company. Okay. Any questions from anybody?
Did she host it on?
It's no, I'm hosting it. So it's hosted, it's in a subfolder of my main domain. Okay. But the thing was, she had learned PHP here at school, but I needed her to learn ASP.NET. So the other part of the challenge was she had to teach herself ASP.NET while she built it. So before I was going to let her build ASP.NET applications for my clients, I wanted her to build one for me and for our company so that I could get a sense that she knew how to do it. So I paid her to build this, so she taught herself how to use ASP.NET, and then once this was up and running, then I started giving her work for paid clients, because all of my work was using ASP.NET. But you could build this in anything. Obviously, it would make sense in here, build it in PHP and MySQL. Okay. So that's in about halfway down in the Assignments tab. Be a good project for you to work on. And again, you're free if you work on it. I'm happy to give you help on it, and you're free to work on it together. I'm not marking it. There's no grade attached to it. Okay. The other thing one of the other suggestions that I got, I can't remember whether it was somebody in this class or somebody in the Friday class in the survey. One of the things they had said was they find the class is much more helpful rather than building a whole bunch of little applications, if basically we build one big one that we just keep adding on to. So at the end of class, you have quite a big application that you could show as a portfolio piece. And that's sort of what we've been doing, because we've been doing that, the students, we've been doing that little athletes application, we added security. So I think we'll just keep going on that. Okay, so the stuff we add again today, we'll work with our files from week 6. Sometime in the next 2 weeks, we're going to do file upload, so we're going to do an image gallery. And in the past, I've done that as a completely separate application. But I think what we can do is we can roll that in. What we can do is add a field for our athletes. We can add an image field to the database. So then when we add or edit an athlete, we're also going to include the ability to upload a photo. And then when we see a list, we can show thumbnails, a thumbnail headshot of each person. So we can build a gallery that way, so that way we'll add and roll the functionality in. And we'll just keep going. Same, I've done the keyword search as a separate application, where we'll make the search built right in. So at the end of class, we'll just keep on working and building onto that as we go. Okay. So what I want to do is I'm actually going to grab our files from week 6. And I'm going to make a copy of them for today. So if you have week 6's files, feel free to grab your own copy. If not, you'll have to grab my copy off of... Actually, I'm not sure whether I put them on Blackboard or whether I just put the link to GitHub. No, the zip file's here in lesson 6, so you can grab my files off of Blackboard if you want, or if you have your own working copy, it would already have your database credentials, you could just grab those files. So I'm just going to clean mine up. So all my files are dated June 9th. So that was 3 weeks ago. Right, last week was reading week. The week before was our exam. So the files should be dated June the 9th. So we've got our pages for add, edit, and delete. We also have our login and register page and our pages for saving a new user and validating their login. Now I'm just going to double check. I'm not sure whether my files have my database credentials in. I may have taken my password out of these. So I'm just going to check it quickly, put my password back in if I need to. Yeah, I'm going to need to put my password back into these pages. Actually, you know what? I won't put my password in. We'll do this more easily. So my password is in, let's see, how many PHP files do we have? So there's 8 PHP files in total. Six of them contain our login. This is a terrible way to structure our application. I did it deliberately, that each one of these files has our credentials. I did this because for the first 6 weeks, I wanted to make you constantly type out that connection string so that you start to get familiar with it. In a real application, a real-world application, how many places should we have our database connection string? How many times should it exist in our application? Jesse? Once. Why?
So we're not repeating code.
Okay, so it's a waste of effort. We're duplicating the code. Why else? Ryan?
We can only do it, we can do it just once throughout the entire thing, and it will be done for one time.
Yep.
And it's much more secure.
It's much more secure as well, right? If we only have those credentials in one place, that's better than putting them all the way through our application. Okay? Now, would our credentials ever change? Possibly. I can think of at least 3 scenarios where we would have to change the credentials. Why might we have to change one or more things in our database connection? Daniel, what would be one reason?
New host.
Okay, so we move from one host to another, right? Well, we might be able to set up the same database name. We might be able to create the same username and password, but the host is certainly going to change. So that's one reason. And sites do move hosts all the time. So that'd be one reason. Why else might we have to change something in our database connection? So moving host would be one possibility.
If you're migrating a database.
Okay, can you explain a bit more about migrating a database?
Okay, let's say you need to back it up.
Okay.
So you need to move all the data from here to there.
Okay, could be, yep. Why else? When might you need to change the username or the password or both on a database?
So when there's a different user.
Okay, could be, right? So somebody who previously had access to the database and worked on the application, maybe they leave the company, they take another job somewhere else, right? So long as they have those credentials, they still have access to the database. So when someone who has access no longer should have access, we should probably change them. So in the database, we need to reset the database password and maybe the username. So any application that talks to that database is going to have to change their connection string. There's one other common business scenario where we're going to want to change the credentials. What can happen potentially to a database that the first thing you should do is go in and change the credentials. So somebody who had access leaves.
Someone who shouldn't have access got access.
Yeah, maybe your database or your server got compromised, right? So if your site or your server's been hacked, you're going to want to reset the credentials on your database. And if you reset the credentials in the database, we're going to have to reset them on any application that uses those credentials. So right here, we've got an 8-page website, and we've got the credentials used in 6 of them, which is not very efficient, right? If we had to change them, just like I have to change them now, I've got to go into all 6 of these and change those. Okay. So we want to look at how we can basically make part of our code modular. So we want that database connection string to live one place in one file in our application, and all the other files can just use it when they need it. It's going to be a lot more efficient. So we can do this with PHP pretty simply. We're going to basically take those 2 lines out, we're going to move them into their own separate file, and then we're going to connect to it. Pretty much the same way an HTML only site could share a CSS file, right? We put all our CSS in a separate .css file, and every HTML just includes an HTML link tag to include that CSS. So we can do the same with PHP. So we want to reuse our database connections. There's other things we want to reuse. What else will we want to reuse in this little application that we built? I'll just load it in the browser from week 6. So if I go to my athletes page from week 6, it'll force me to log in. And my login is test and test, because I told you 3 weeks ago we'd need this login later, and that way everybody's account is test and test. So what other things, besides our database connection, what other code or other things are being repeated here? Is this page public or private? What about this page? Public or private? Some said public, some said private. Well, let's see what we did with the code back in week 6.
Oh, right. We didn't finish making it private.
Right? Should this page be public or private? Should be private, right? So it should need the same code that makes this one private, right? All our private pages need that same code, right, where we're checking. So if we look at our athletes page right up at the top, right, here's what we did. We called session start to access the session, and then we checked whether we had a user ID in the session variable, yes or no, and if not, we kicked them back to the login screen, same as what Blackboard would do if you tried going to any page in Blackboard without logging in. So this page has it, this page needs it, needs it, needs it, right? So all of these pages share that code, so we could copy and paste those 10 lines on every page, not very efficient, right? And then if we need to change the logic there, we'd have to go into all 4 pages and change them. So much more efficient. Let's put this in its own file, and any page that should be private, we can just link that, we can call that in. So we can call PHP functions by putting them basically in their own file. But it's not only code, sometimes it's visual elements, right? Let's look at the top of this. So we've got an add link and we have a list link. What should we do at the top and also at the bottom of this page that we would expect to see in every single site? Well, I'll go back here. I'll go back 8 weeks, right? We went here, and I said to you, what stays the same and what changes? Right? So the header and footer are going to be common here. Right? So my header and my footer are common. Do you think every page has a different version of the header and footer, or do they have one header and one footer? One header and one footer, right? So also the visual elements should be reusable, so if we want to change them, we don't have to go into every page and change the header to add a new link. We can just open up a header file, add the link there, and all of the pages will automatically get that change. Okay? So really what we're doing, go here, is deconstructing a site, same here. So this page, basically every real web application you go to every day, it looks to the end user like one web page, right? From top to bottom, whether it's this one or this one. What these pages really are a collection of pieces that are spliced together at runtime to look like one page. Okay? There's 4 different components here. There's I think there's 5. There's a header, there's a navigation, there's a news piece, there's a featured properties piece, and there's a footer. These are all physically separate files. Okay. So when I click into one of these pages, the only thing that changes is that section here, the middle, right? Same header, same navigation, same sidebar, same footer. If I want to click a news, header, nav, the only thing that's changing here is the middle. So what we want to be able to do is to break up our pages into a series of components, and then we link them together. Okay. So So that way we can easily reuse our code, like our database connections, our headers and footers. What else does it allow us to do? Why else would it be beneficial to break up these things into separate pieces?
You don't have to reload the whole page.
That would be one, right? It's going to be faster because those things are going to get cached, like the header and footer. They're going to navigation. They're going to reload much more quickly. Why else is it useful? What else can we do? So look at what's different. Let me go here. So look at the structure of this page. So here's all the houses that are for sale. Here, if anybody's got $1.2 million on them, free. How is the structure different from this page? What's similar and what's different between this page and this one?
Drop the sidebar.
Right. So this page has the news sidebar. This page originally, up until last December, it also had the news sidebar. And then suddenly the client called and said, you know what? We want to show the photos and videos bigger, so on this page, can you get rid of the sidebar? Well, if we had built this page as a whole page top to bottom, that would have been a lot more work. All we had to do is just remove the sidebar from this page. And then we could set the width for the main content bigger. Because it's modular, we can just swap that out. And if at some point they want the news back in on this page, no problem. We just re-enable. We just plunk it right back. We just link it back in. So now we have this whole series of basically widgets or swappable components that we can move in and out and move around. Let's say they want to move the news, but they want it over here. Well, we can just move where that piece goes, but it's its own component. So it's much easier for us to maintain and update our site. What about if we're building, what if we've got multiple sites to build? How does breaking our application up into functional pieces, how would it help you if you had, let's say, you had three different websites to build? Why would this save you work?
You can just use it little pieces, put them.
Exactly. If you have 3 sites to build, how many of them are going to need a header? How many of them are going to need a footer? How many of them are going to need navigation? How many of them might need something like a news or events calendar, right? Basically, by building our applications this way, what you're doing is we're creating our own code libraries of reusable components so that we can build our sites more quickly. Somebody needs a login screen or an event calendar, or if somebody else were to come to me now, for example, I'm talking to somebody who builds houses, and he has a whole gallery of houses that he's custom built that he wants to show on his site. How easy will it be for me to take this, modularize it, change how it looks, customize it for him, and plug it in, right? So let's build something once as a separate library, file library, and then we can just bring it in. So that way, over time, every project we build, we're adding to our toolbox of things we have and we can do, and we can build things more quickly and customize them and refine them over time. So what we want to do with this little application is we want to have a separate header that's modular, that's shared by all the pages. We want to put a footer along the bottom that we'll build as a separate file, again as its own file, so we could change that if we wanted to make changes in the footer. We'll want to make our database connection modular, so we only have that in one place. We want our authentication check modular, so we have that in one place. So we're going to break all this up into a series of components. It'll still basically look the same, except we'll add on the header and footer. But we're going to break it up into pieces, but in the browser it will run together all as one. Okay. So here's what I want you to do. Quick quiz for you. Not a quiz, quick task for you. There are actually 4 different PHP functions that will allow us to link one PHP file to another. So let's say we're going to put our database connection in its own file. And then any PHP page that uses it, we want to be able to reference or link to it. Okay? PHP has 4 functions that all basically do the same thing. There are small semantic differences. What I want you to do is see if you can find the 4 function names that let us link or embed one PHP file to another one, and see if you can find what the differences are between the 4 versions. We can use any one of them. They're all very similar. So I'll give you 5 minutes, do a little research, see what you can find out. And then we'll talk about it, and then we'll start implementing those features. Okay, so what did you find out? Jesse?
I found include,
Okay,
require,
yep.
and redirect. I don't know if that,
Okay, well, include and require are 2 of the 4
Good.
we want to use. So we can use either of them. Did you find any different? How are they different
yeah,
then?
so they work differently upon failure. Require will stop the page from loading. It's not found.
Yep.
That's off the top of my head.
Okay. Okay. So what other 2? So those are 2 of the ones we could use.
The only other ones that I could find was it was require once and include once.
You got it. Okay. So we've got require. I'll enable this on Blackboard.
I mean, it's exactly what it says. Once.
So these functions are all similar. You can use any of them. So the main difference between include and require is if we try to link to a file and that file is not found, let's say we mistype it or we misname it, if we use include, it'll get a warning, but our page will still continue to execute. If we use require, it means that file's mandatory, and if we don't find it, it'll throw an error and the page crashes. Okay? The other difference between include and include once, or require and require once, when we use once, it means you can only link to the same file. Let's say we make a file called header.php. We can only link to it 1 time per page. We can't link. Now, why we would ever want to link to the same file more than once, I don't really know. Typically, so I think in the textbook they use require once. So that's what I'm going to use in class. If you prefer to use one of the other 3 versions of it, that's fine. They all just take 1 parameter, which is what's the name of the page you want to connect to. Okay? So when we include or require, what this means, actually it means a few things. So any code that's in that included file is available. So something like our database connection would then be available in our main page. If our included or our required file has visual elements like HTML or images, those are going to show up. So that's how we can, do something like include a header, because the header includes the logo and this background image and the social icons. It also means that any variables that are available, any variables we declare in an include file are available in the other file. Just like classes in a CSS file are available in the HTML file that links to it. Okay. So we're going to use this to make our database connection modular, and then we'll look at how we would use this to make a header file. Okay. So what I want you to do is open up. You need these 6 pages. So you need all of the 4 pages that have the word athlete in the title, as well as save registration and validate. So all of these pages are from lesson 6. So if you were here, you have your own copy. You can also grab the copy off of Blackboard. So all 6 of these are connecting to the database. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a new file. We're going to move our database connection in there, and then we're just going to link to it instead. So I'm going to make a new PHP page. And up at the very top, I'll put in some PHP tags. So this will be the last time I type the database connection. We can now just reuse this file each week moving forward. So put in your database credentials. and I will enable PDO debugging. So again, we've been duplicating this line of code in all our pages. We'll move it into one global file. So we no longer need these 2 lines of code in all of those other 6 pages that I have open. So I'm going to save this file in my folder for today. And I'm going to just save this one as db.php. Nice, short, and simple. So it'd be easy for us to link it in. So what we want to do now is go into each one of these files. I'll just start with my athletes page. So on my athletes page, we no longer need the code here. What are we going to replace this with? So these are the exact 2 lines I just put in my db.php. So instead of connecting here, we want to call our db.php file. So how would we do it?
Require once.
And Expression Web recognizes that as a built-in PHP function, so all it wants to know is what's the name of the file we're requiring. So we're going to link to our database file here. I'm actually going to do the same. You know what? I'll just copy that line. We may as well replace it in all the files. So I'll go to my validate page. And I'll call require once. I'll go to my athlete page. Down here we're connecting. Call require once. Our delete page. Our save page. Oops, I don't need this. And our save registration. So all 6 of those files we built over the last several classes, they all had that connection. So this is much more efficient, right? It's less typing. It's easier for us to do it accurately. And if we have to change our connection, now we just go here and change it here instead of changing it on every page. So what I want you to do is upload all of these files. Now upload everything to your Lesson 8 folder. And let's make sure that it still runs. We can still add, edit, delete, log in. We should be able to do all of those things. So I'm going to connect to DreamHost and upload everything to a Lesson 8 folder, and we'll run our application. So we shouldn't notice any change in how it works. It should work exactly the same way as it did before. So I'm going to make sure I can still log in with the credentials test and test. I can still get my list of athletes. I can still add, edit, delete. So all our database functions are still working. We've just made that code modular. Now actually there's one small problem. Everything seems to work. However, let's look at the source of our page. We do have an issue here. Why have I got this? Why have I got some of this code in red, which in the browser indicating it doesn't like? What's the problem?
Oh, there's a doc type inside the file.
Why are some of these tags in red? Braden?
Because you have two of them?
Right, because we've got those tags in our athletes page, but now we also have those tags in our db.php. Right? We have them here as well. When I created a new PHP file in ExpressionWeb, it automatically generates those tags. So we don't really need two of those. In fact, we shouldn't have two sets. So we either need to remove some of the tags here, or we need to remove some of the tags on all of our pages. Where should we remove them? Yeah, let's remove them from the database file. This isn't really a visible page. This is just a part of a page. All it's doing is our connection. So we don't need any of that stuff. So I'm going to remove all of those HTML tags from our db.php. This is just the code for connecting to the database. So I'm going to clean those tags out. I'm going to save and re-upload my database page. I'll refresh, and now all of those extra tags are gone. So that's should be fairly simple. So any page we build now on, if we need the database, anything new that we do, we just have to call require once db.php. Okay. Any questions so far about what we're doing here? Really, it's pretty simple. So these kinds of sites, this is what happens. We've got a separate header, separate footer, and those things, any other reusable pieces, just get linked in with an include or a require. And we build those out as modular components. Okay, so what we're going to do, we'll take a break here. I believe I owe people some coffee. I have not forgotten, although I have to check my email to see who it is, actually, that I owe. So what we're going to do when we come back, we're going to want to, we said this page was private, yet our edit, delete pages and save, those pages are still public. So we're going to want to take this security check that we have. We're going to want to put that in its own file and include it on any page that should be private. Then we're going to build a common header and a footer. And then once we've got our header, we're also going to need to add a log out because we didn't do that in week 6. So we'll do all of those things after we take our break. So we'll